Good day, my name is Michael Molondo and I'm going to present on the subject of HIV/AIDS Studies 2. The code is HS20S2 and I am going to divide this presentation in two parts. The first part is to prepare yourself for the examination and what you have to expect, and then to give you some practical tools and guidelines and tips on what you have to do before you're going to write the exam, and then also during the exam what you also have to look at, and so on. Now, the first thing is, before the exam is I will advise you to have at least a 2 months exam timetable. Before you write the exam, 2 months time, draw up a timetable, and then what you have to do is you've got your chapter or your subject, and you've got like 10 or 15 chapters or 7 chapters. Divide those chapters over the period of 1 month or 2 months, all depends on you, so that you can prepare yourself. Now, there is 3 things that you have to do. Is you have to read through the chapters to have an understanding on the context. Then secondly, make notes while you are writing, because those notes will play a very important role, especially when you're going to revise. And circle, underline words that you don't understand. Make notes, because the more notes you make, the better it will be for you to understand. And then of course, revision, preferably 1 week before you're going to write, or 2 weeks. It all depends on you, how your time schedule or how you have actually draw up your timetable. Then the other thing is, within the exam, during the exam, there are 4 things that you have to look at. The first thing is, when you get the exam paper, don't start right away. First, read through the whole questions. After you've read through the whole question, then secondly, you select the easiest question. Once you have selected it, then you have to read that question which you have selected, so that number 4, you can answer the question. The mistake many students are doing is they don't answer the question. They misinterpret or interpret the question and assume this is what the question is all about. So it's very important for you that when you are going to write the exam, do those 4 things. Read through the questions, all the questions in your exam, select the best one, the one that's easier, that you can answer. Fourthly is read through it again to have an understanding, and fourthly is then answer the question and don't interpret the question. So now I'm going to go to the second part of my presentation, where I'm going to look at the content of the specific subject. Now, this does not mean that you are not prohibited to read through the whole subject or the study manual. So you are still required or requested that you need to read the whole subject from chapter 1 up to the last chapter, and also to read additional information on the subject. So don't just rely on the scope, what we call examination scope, because it's better to have a whole holistic understanding on the context of the subject itself. So the first thing that you can look at is the whole issue of GBV, or gender-based violence. We have talked so many times about GBV, we have talked so many times about gender-based violence, but it's very important for you that when you are going to write, you have to know the understanding about gender-based violence. What is gender-based violence? And then the different forms of gender-based violence, the different kinds of gender-based violence that you're also getting. And then thirdly is, then you have to look at other practices of gender-based violence in the context of Africa or Southern Africa. Then you can also look at the experiences of Namibia. And then of course you have to look at how does gender-based violence, what role does gender-based violence play when it comes to HIV/AIDS. So because the word violence, it's a very important one, and this gender related. So what do you do, for example, if somebody is being violated because of his or her gender, and that person has been exposed to HIV/AIDS. So in your paper, discuss that in detail and give practical example how you understand the subject on GBV, and how that is then also linked to HIV/AIDS. So preferably is go to your manual, read it, also go to the internet just to discuss and to know what gender-based violence is all about. Now, Namibia is currently one of the countries that's it's very high, is having very high incidence of gender-based violence. So, discuss a little bit about Namibia itself when it comes to gender-based violence. Why do we have a high prevalence of gender-based violence in this country? And then you also need to discuss the whole issue of the intervention to address GBV in Namibia. What are the different interventions or the solutions? What programs are being implemented? What activities or actions are being implemented to address the whole issue of GBV? So discuss this in detail in your paper, and then also look at it from the point being, as I said earlier, from different African countries. So there are so many best practices when it comes to GBV and HIV/AIDS. So in your paper you have to discuss this in detail and explain it also in detail. Now then, the other thing is all about gender mainstreaming. Now, mainstreaming actually only says that if you have a program, say a workplace program and on health, and so throughout the chapters or the policy that you have or the program that you have to talk about the issue of gender. There's a lot of misconception and ignorance when it comes to gender. People only think that when you talk about gender, you only talk about women. But when you talk about gender, you are talking or you are addressing the issues of both male and female. Now, you have to look at this. How are you going to take the gender-based or the gender program, gender itself, and mainstream it in your program, whether it's in your organization or whether it's in your company? So, gender mainstreaming, it's a subject that has been discussed for so many times and in different countries. And then also look at the UN Convention on the elimination of the discrimination against women. So it will actually give you a very basic understanding on when it comes to gender. And when you look at gender, as I say, you need to look at both male and female. Then the other aspect about gender is also what are the roles of male, what are the roles of female. Now, your role does not actually discriminate who you are as a man or as a woman. Now, a role can be exchanged, a role can be complemented, a role can be readjusted. So it does not mean so. And when you are going to discuss the role of gender, then the issue of culture. Cultural practices, cultural norms will also come in. What role does culture play when it comes to the role of a woman, when it comes to the role of a man? And you will find there's so many discrimination when it comes to cultural undertone or cultural practices. And you will find that at the end of the day, there are certain roles that are being assigned for men and certain roles that are assigned for women. Now, in the context of Africa and some of our development countries, you have a situation where a woman as a role it's minor or it's underestimated or undervalued compared to the role of men. You will always find the issue of the girl child. How the girl child is treated and how the role of a girl child is perceived in comparison to the role of a boy child. Now, both of them are being raised in a village or in a household, and you will see that there are certain expectations that communities and society have placed on both men and female or boys and girls when it comes to their role to play. So society, the community, actually define what our role is. So in your discussion, discuss, what influence does culture have? when it comes to the role of men and the role of women, and how you can combat that, how you can address that. That even in your mainstreaming program, whether it's at the workplace or in your company, when you are going to address the issue of gender-based, within your workplace, it's very important, because even in the workplace, you will find that also there are certain roles that are being assigned to men and certain roles that are assigned to women. Now, we are living in the 21st century where the rights of both men and women needs to be respected. Now, there are certain positions or careers that are only assigned for men, certain careers that are only assigned for women. So who determines that? Is that culture? Is that tradition? Is that community? You have a situation where a woman wants to be a mechanical engineer, means that she wants to repair cars. Now, she finds herself in a situation or in an environment where it's a men's only world. How does this woman cope? And then you will find that even a situation where the woman is qualified, equally qualified like the men. Some of instances you find women that are more qualified than men, and they are doing the same job. But because of this whole, and this is where I want to come in, we call it stereotyping. You have a misconception or an idea that women must only do certain things, or there is a misconception or a myth that this is only a man's job, not a woman's job. Now, stereotyping is something that is actually a threat when it comes to gender balance and gender equality. So in that whole thing, you have to discuss how does stereotyping shape the roles of men and women, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in community, whether it's in society. And stereotyping actually it's a level of discrimination that certain gender are having against certain gender. So it is something that you have to look at. Now, there is also stereotyping that it's a man is not supposed to be in the kitchen, a man is not supposed to cook, or a man is not supposed to be a nanny. It's only the work of a woman. Now, who determines that? Now, in your discussion, bring out those issues, bring out those aspects, those dynamics. Why do we have so many gender stereotyping? For example, the misconception that men are better managers than women. Now, you do find women that are actually best managers or much better managers than men. So this is where you've got different levels of stereotyping, and in your discussion or in your answer you have to discuss it in detail. How do you perceive stereotyping when it comes to gender discrimination? Now, there are so many experiences, so many examples that you can share also when it comes to stereotyping and how even the role of men or women are being perceived. Now, the reason that we have currently is if you look in Africa, for example, we are looking at the issue of politics. It's very interesting to find that when you look, for example, at presidential candidates within the continent of Africa, you will find that, most presidential candidates are men. Now, is this a stereotyping that it's only men that can be better presidents than women? So this is something that you can discuss. So far we only had one president, which was from Liberia, and she was the only president, a woman president. Now the question is, where do you bring in the whole issue of stereotyping when it comes to chieftainship? Who can be chief in a community? Because of culture, because of tradition, it's only men that are supposed to be chiefs and not women. The other stereotyping is that the notion that men are better driver than women, and so many misconceptions that you have that when people see a woman driving a car, then this the stereotyping mentality that women are worse drivers. So discuss this in your paper. Give some example about gender stereotyping and how you can address this whole gender stereotyping when it comes to women and the rights of women. Then, of course, there is the socio-economic inequalities. Address that also. The question is men and women equal when it comes to their status or to their position or to their responsibility and even to their roles? So discuss that. Now, when you look at the social factors or the social dimension of equality or inequality, you find that society has designed a way of created a system where in society women are having lesser role to play than men. For an example, you have, for an example, where women cannot make the decision, the men must make the final decision. Now, discuss those issues, and you can actually differentiate between equality and inequality. So, what makes a man and a woman equal? And what makes a man and a woman unequal? Discuss those dimensions. And then economically, you have a situation where a woman and a man apply for the same job, and then just because of their gender, you find that either the woman or the man gets the job. Or a situation in the workplace where both men and women having the same experience, the same qualification, are in the same position as manager, and then you find that the man's salary is much higher than a woman's salary, for an example. So discuss those socioeconomic inequalities and give some examples. And then you can also discuss it. What role does gender play when it comes to that? For an example, inequality in some countries where a woman cannot buy a house without the consent of her husband. Now, is that discrimination, or is that culture? So discuss those examples and how you can address it. So when you are going to raise in your paper, in your answer, those problems, it's also very important for you to give them the solution. Is what do you solve? Because of these practices, what do you actually suggest is the solution or the intervention to address the inequalities between men and women? So it's very important that when you look into this, you have to bring out the reality of and the experiences on the ground when it comes to inequality. So there is so many examples that you can give. You can also compare Namibia to other SADC countries or African countries to look at the whole aspect of gender inequalities, equalities, the socio-economic. So there are so many issues that you can actually address when it comes to women issues. And then the other things is, and we have addressed it so many times, is the issue of orphans and vulnerable children, OVC. What role do they play when it comes, for example, to their rights? Now, it's very important that even at a children's level, there is also, and I've raised this earlier, the girl-child, boy-child dynamics when it comes to equality and equality. So you have to talk about that, you have to discuss about it, also about ABC. And then, of course, what impact does HIV has on your program, on a community and on a society or in a country? And this is where you can also discuss the different assessment that you find when it comes when it wants to measure the impact. Now, does the gender programs that we have, gender-related programs we have currently in Namibia, do they make any impact? HIV/AIDS and gender, does it make any impact? And if it does make any impact, what impact does it make when it comes to HIV/AIDS? So you can discuss this, the different tools that you find that you can use to look at gender-based violence, to look at gender inequality or equality, also to look at, you can also look at the role, gender roles, Is there any impact? You can look at current programs. How do you measure the impact? What are you look at, and how do you discuss it? So it's very important that you have to go study, look at your study manual, looking at different health impact assessment or HIV impact assessment, because all what you want to do at this stage is you want to assess to see whether the current programs or intervention makes any difference. Is there an impact or is there no impact? So you have to discuss it also in detail. Then the issue of budget. When we talk about budget, it's just the income and expenditure on a program. You can look at our national budget, the budget of Namibia. What impact does the budget have when it comes to gender-based programs and HIV/AIDS? So does the budget make provision for such programs? Does the budget make provision for such intervention? And what can communities do to influence, for example, the national budget as part of advocacy and community mobilization? Then, of course, we know that when you have to budget, you have to look also at the issue of expenditure. Now, you can also discuss a little bit about budget projects or projection of budget. How do you do projection, looking at the future for the next 5 years, about health expenditure? And then you can also bring in the issue of articles or convention that has been signed or actually rectified. You can look at different commitments like the Abuja commitment that looks at that countries will at least commit more than 10 to 15% of the budget to health, and specifically HIV/AIDS. You can look at the Paris Declaration that looks at the harmonization of funding. So you can also discuss those issues in the light of budgeting and budget within the country, which is very important. Then, of course, governance. What role does governance play when it comes to HIV/AIDS programs and government? Now, we have discussed it also in the past, where I've made mention to the King's Report 1, 2, and 3, South Africa. And this is only the way where you have to look at the 8 characteristics of governance. So what made an organization, what qualify organization with a healthy governance system? So you can talk about the board of governance, what role the board play. You can also look at the aspects of management, what role do they play, and what are the qualities that are needed for any governance structure within the organization or a company. So that's my presentation for now, and I hope that you will be ready for your exam, and this presentation will help you to prepare yourself. And I thank you for listening to me, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you. Bye.